Hello and welcome back to Internalize the podcast. Today I am actually trying something new and I'm recording the podcast before writing the blog post, which is not something I usually do. I usually write the blog post and I use it as a script almost for my podcast. But this is an interesting idea I had just just now actually, and I want to see how it pans out. So let's see how it goes, and yeah, let's get right into it. Today I want to talk mainly about DaVinci Resolve on iPad. So it's kind of well known in the tech sphere that the iPad is not hardware limited. Honestly, this is a separate point altogether, but it's kind of ridiculous that after years, it's been more than I don't know how long it's been. I think it launched in 2011. Actually, let me just check. Uh, iPad launch date 7th March 2012. It's been more than a decade, and uh, the iPad has still not really gotten any strong competition. I think the closest they've gotten to any form of competition whatsoever uh, is the Samsung tabs from last year, maybe this year, earlier this year. But I don't know. It's still not enough. The Samsung tablets, they have interesting hardware choices, which like some decisions are better than the iPads, which I agree with. But some like they just don't keep up in terms of software. It's basically Android and steroids, which doesn't work on iPad. But anyway, so in terms of hardware, iPads have been so far and away better. They've been like the best in the world for in the tablet sphere in terms of the processors, in terms of displays. I think displays you could give Samsung the edge, but the displays are still nuts. In terms of everything, in terms of usability, I'd argue that like Apple just does it better. No one really does it as good as Apple does. So, and I think, yeah, anyway, I think that's besides the point. The point I'm trying to make is it's obvious, it's been heavily documented that the iPad's hardware is much too good, especially in the iPad Pro and to a lesser extent the newest iPad Air. Okay, maybe not to a lesser extent, to the same extent. I don't think it matters. No, actually, no. Uh, Maybe to a lesser extent, but to some extent, the iPad Air as well. They're not bottlenecked by hardware, and they haven't been for a long time. Well, I think the iPad Pros are probably a better description of this. The newest iPad Pro, which launched I think in November, has the newest M2 chip. That's the same chip that's there in the MacBook Air, and the one before that, which launched maybe a year ago, I think in August. I don't know. Let's see. The previous one, the one before the M2 launched in uh it launched with the M1 chip, which is the same as the MacBook Air and Pro of that year. And it's ridiculous. How do you have something uh with the same performance as a literal laptop running macOS, running iOS, a lightweight operating system which has basically no apps to take advantage of it? I guess you could make the argument that the M2 and M1 aren't running at their full potential because they don't have active cooling. They're in much thinner devices and they have to deal with battery power to a much higher extent than a MacBook has to. But in any case, wait, actually, let's see, when did M1 iPad Pro release? Uh, that yeah, I was right. It launched in April 2021. So it's just ridiculous. After that, the iPad before that also was stupidly overpowered. It had the A12Z chip, which may not sound like you don't have a frame of reference for that, but just know it was ridiculously overpowered, and there was just nothing to keep to like There's nothing. It couldn't do any. It didn't have anything it couldn't do, which may sound like a good thing, but it wasn't fully a good thing. The reason for that is there was no real reason for someone to buy an iPad Pro. Like, of course, Apple sold. Like you can do anything. Apple's marketing had was very infamously, "What's a laptop?" The iPad could do everything a laptop can, but in terms of creative workloads, in terms of professional workloads, iPads have not kept up. They don't have apps to do any of this. I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but let's give you an example. Let's say you want to buy the highest end iPad Pro. That will probably cost you around $1,800. Let's look apple.com. Let's just go to the Apple store and let's go for iPad Pro and buy. Go to the iPad Pro. So let's just I'm maxing it out, and it says you add the Apple Pencil as well, and let's add the Magic Keyboard, and you will get it goes for $2,800, which is ridiculous in comparison. Let's go to Mac. Let's go for the highest end MacBook Air with the M2 chip again. So I don't know. This is probably not the most fair comparison, especially considering the MacBook Air. Um, the MacBook Air is a smaller display. It doesn't have touchscreen. Maybe I should have gone with the 11-inch iPad Pro instead. But in any case, it's $3,000. It's only $100 more than the iPad Pro maxed out with an Apple Pencil and the Magic Keyboard. So on first glance, you might think that the iPad Pro is better value than the MacBook Air, and there's probably an argument to be made about that. But it depends on what you're doing with the laptop in the end. If you're doing something like let's say if you're programming, for example, if you make iOS apps, you kind of need a Mac. You don't get Xcode on iPad. It's depressing. If you're a music producer, you don't get Logic or Ableton or Pro Tools or any of the big DAWs on iPad. I guess the only DAW you really get is GarageBand, and I guess you could make an argument about FL Studio Mobile, but I don't give that argument much value. It's pretty useless as a DAW. And if you're a video editor, you only have one option, and that's LumaFusion, and that's nowhere near as powerful as something like Final Cut or uh, Premiere. You do have Premiere Rush and iMovie, but of course they are not great in terms of comparing. They don't really compare. Let's put it that way. They don't compare to their more fleshed out counterparts. But I guess the only real pro quote unquote workflow that an app and an iPad works in is the what do you call it? If you're a photographer, because you have Lightroom, and Lightroom is like most of it is there. I guess Photoshop isn't as powerful as it is on desktop, but I'd argue it's probably the closest thing you get to a desktop experience. If you're a photographer, an iPad is a good option. But I think that changes here because DaVinci Resolve, with the launch of the M2 iPad Pro, in promotional material, you could see someone editing a video using DaVinci Resolve on the iPad, and that caught a lot of people's attentions because people have been asking for Logic and Final Cut on iPads for ages now, and it hasn't come. There have been rumors since 2020, since the A12Z iPad came out, and there hasn't been any there's nothing that came from that. But that has changed. DaVinci Resolve is indeed coming to iPad, I believe, at the end of this year. They said Q4 2022, and we should get DaVinci Resolve on the iPad by the end of this year, which is honestly amazing. It is in beta right now, and people do have access to the beta, and it looks pretty good. It looks very similar to the desktop version. So you if you edit on Resolve on desktop like I do right now, it's probably an interesting proposition to switch to something like an iPad, which probably is much better optimized, is much faster, depending on the computer you use. Of course, if you're using a Mac, there's probably no reason to do that unless you're traveling. But anyway, that's a separate point altogether, which I should get to actually. That's an interesting point I should get to. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it looks very, very nice. So in terms of the app itself, there is right now no edit page like there is on the desktop version. It's a lot more, it's closer to iMovie than it is to Premiere Rush. If you've used either of these two programs, you'll probably know what I mean. iMovie is a lot more plug and play in the sense that you throw stuff down and it'll do most of the heavy lifting for you. So if you want to make simple stuff, iMovie is really, really powerful and it's really easy to do simple stuff on it. But if you want to do more complex stuff, it gets really tricky to do it and it's just unnecessarily complicated. But on the other hand, Premiere Rush has the exact opposite problem. Like it's pretty powerful in the sense that you can do a lot of stuff that you can't do on iMovie on it, but it's really complex. The UI is pretty messed up and it doesn't really make much sense to me. And the fact that they used a desktop interface on an iPad or an iPhone, it doesn't really work the way you expect it to with touch and Apple Pencil. I assume it works better if you're connected with mouse and keyboard, but it doesn't really work well with touch, which is still the predominant use of an iPad. You don't really connect a keyboard very often to an iPad unless you have a Magic Keyboard, but that's a separate issue. But yeah, Resolve, I think, took the better approach. Resolve took the approach of not bringing over the edit tab, the same edit tab that's there on the desktop versions, but they brought over the cut tab. If you've used Resolve, you probably don't use the cut tab very often, and I know I don't, so it's probably going to be kind of a learning experience to try and use the cut tab on the iPad. But I think it's a very good decision in the sense that it'll be easy to get into it, especially considering Resolve is a free app, and it will be also pretty powerful knowing how Resolve is as an application already uh on desktop. It is it makes Resolve more accessible, which is overall just a good thing. I think another interesting point to be made about this is the fact that the Resolve cut page on is better with touch than the edit page. The edit page has like multiple tracks stacked on top of each other, and trying to drag clips from one point to another just sounds like absolute hell. It'll be so painful if you try to use the edit tab on on what do you call it, on Resolve for iPad. But I think that's why I think the cut tab is a good decision. I went all I went unnecessarily in detail, but it's okay. uh so that's about the cut tab. The second, I believe, there is the color tab, which is the exact same as there it is there uh on desktop, which is amazing, which is absolutely amazing, because I actually like editing photos on iPads. I like the display a lot. It's a lot nicer than my computer monitor. It's more fun doing color grading stuff with the Apple Pencil. And the color tab for color grading on Resolve is super, 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 super strong. There's no real like it's Hollywood grade. Honestly, like they market this, and I don't know if it's fun for the marketing, but there are Hollywood films that use Resolve just for the color grading, and seeing that come to iPad is incredible. I really want to see what I can do with it and what other people can do with it without being severely limited by my nonsense of an integrated GPU on my computer. So, yeah, I don't know about the other tabs. The question is about Fusion and Fairlight. There was someone who got access to the Fusion beta, but I did not see much information about whether Fusion is coming to iPad on the blog post, but I hope it does. It would be interesting to see VFX work on iPad. it would really push it to its limits. But I think it can handle it, especially considering the super high level of optimization that happens. But yeah, it's we will see. It's something that will only be known when it releases, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, which is really fun. Uh, I don't know about Fairlight. The audio editing program, for anyone who's not aware, Fairlight is the audio part of Resolve. I hope that comes too, because Fairlight is actually pretty good. I like the Fairlight library a lot, ironically enough. It's pretty it's pretty nice. There are a lot of effects. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it works. I don't know how it'll work. Maybe Fairlight will. I don't know. I don't have a Mac, so I don't know if Fairlight already has support for Audio Unit 3 extensions. So I don't know. Uh, that is something that's a big question mark in my head. So yeah, uh, that is the overview on Resolve. What can this do on for iPad users? Uh, I don't know, honestly. It's an interesting question. Maybe I think it gives iPad Pros a better value proposition, especially if they decide to limit it to iPad Pros, which seems likely, maybe only to the Pros and the Air. I don't know. In any case, even if they limit it, even if they don't limit it, it's probably going to make iPad Pros a much more interesting proposition for creatives specifically. So yeah, I want to see what happens. For if you already edit video, I used to edit video on iPad, and if you have done that, I want to try. I want to try using it on my iPad and seeing how it works, especially considering Resolve is kind of limited, kind of GPU intensive, and my processor doesn't keep up on Windows. So that is the big question, and that is the question that needs to be answered when the Resolve beta comes out of beta and gets released fully. Now, will this use the ridiculous processors to the max? Is the question. I think so. I believe the beta is only out for M2 and M1 iPads for now, and I think it's probably the closest thing apart from emulation and things. Especially if Fusion comes out, it's probably the only closest thing that can actually create uh, push iPads to the max. Uh, there's really no other workload that completely brings an iPad Pro to its knees. But maybe this will, and I will have to do some testing on my own. Maybe I'll create an update podcast in a couple of months, maybe in February. I don't know. Uh, After my exams finish and after I use this enough, actually, I need to use it a lot. So yeah, that is one thing. Uh, I think the M series chips are still a question mark. I don't know if they'll be used to the max, but if it comes to the A series, which is also a question, will it come to the A series processor? If it comes to the A series processor, they will definitely feel the pain that comes with running Resolve. Anyway, so right now, as I said, it's only available, the beta is only available for our M series processors, which is the new iPad Air, the current iPad Air, the current iPad Pro, and the iPad Pro from the generation before. So the question now is whether it will come to the newest iPad, not the newest, sorry, the iPad before the M1 iPad Pro, the A12Z model, maybe the one before that. uh, will it come to that? Will Resolve limited? Resolve, Blackmagic Design, the people who created Resolve, believes that it will run on the older processors just fine, which is a good sign as someone who owns an A12Z Bionic iPad Pro. But yeah, I want to see. Maybe that'll accentuate the differences between the old and new models. Maybe it won't. Maybe you will see some thermal throttling on the new iPads. But I don't know. I hope it comes. I would be really excited if it comes. But yeah, it sounds like so much. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to finally see some pro apps come to an iPad. Maybe after this, you could see Ableton coming to iPad. Maybe you could see Final Cut, a Final Cut version, maybe a Final Cut that is parallel to the Mac version come to iPad. It sounds really cool, but the question is, who is this for, right? I think I am part of this audience. I am not exactly pleased with Resolve on Windows right now, just because my computer isn't strong enough. And I like using an iPad for doing creative stuff. It's just such a cool device to use. It's really fun using an iPad, which I don't really feel about many other devices. Uh, I think it could be a very strong secondary computer for traveling instead of a laptop because it is overall less footprint than a laptop. Maybe it could be used by creatives who do it all because iPads are still the de facto for something like design, maybe to a lesser extent photography. But if you video edit on top of that, it could be an interesting proposition. But I think it all comes down to how Resolve runs. So yeah, that's the big question. That's the big question that needs answering, and that is the question which I hope to answer to you next year sometime when the beta comes out of beta comes fully releases, Resolve fully releases on iPad, and I get to use it properly for maybe a month or so. And then I think I can make a pretty sustained judgment about this, about Resolve on iPad. And I really, really, really hope it works out because then we just get m- we'll it'll start off more and more. What do you call it? It'll start off the trend of more and more pro apps coming to iPad, and I hope that trend starts. So yeah, I think that's all for today. Let's see how the blog post goes, and thank you for listening. And I will see you next week, I hope.